That's where Rocky's been. So.
Cassidy, or is it Justine downstairs? Who's at the? Okay. And are we being recorded now? Okay, thank you. Okay. So are we ready to call this meeting to order? Okay. Hello, everyone. This is Larimer County Commissioner Jody Scheib-McNally, Chair of the Board of County Commissioners. Today is July 5th, 2023. I call this meeting to order for the Board of County Commissioners for a work session regarding, sorry, I'm just trying to look for the wording, a work session on our ordinance for tobacco and nicotine for the Larimer County. Joining me at the table today are my colleagues, Larimer County Commissioner John Cafalis and Larimer County Commissioner Kristen Stevens. Also, a County Attorney Andy Lewis is here, and our County Manager Lorenda Volker, and our Larimer County Health Director Tom Gonzalez. So with that, I will turn this over to Andy, I believe, or no, to Kelsey. Well, Tom, I'm going to have you introduce Kelsey. Everyone's pointing at each other, so who's going to? Okay, Tom, I pick you. Just kick this off. Thank you all for being here today for this important topic. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for having us, Commissioners. Tom Gonzalez, Public Health Director, Larimer County. With me, I have Kelsey Lyon, who's our Manager of our Public Health Planning and Partnerships, and of course, Andy. We're here coming back from, I think it was a month or so ago, when there was a review of ordinances through the Attorney's Office to the Board of County Commissioners. And one of those ordinances was tobacco and primarily, specifically, possession of minors. So you asked for a work session to kind of bring us back up to speed on this situation. If you recall, before the pandemic, we had quite a few conversations with the previous board when the pandemic hit, and we've had quite a few changes over the last 3 years. So we want to look at a couple of objectives here. First, review the minor in possession ordinance and where we're making some recommendations, and then provide information about state and local tobacco retail licenses. Again, lots has changed over the last 3 years in a productive manner. So what we'll do is start talking a little bit about that. Big one was in 2020, the legislation passed a bill that redefined a minor, at least by the age. It's now referred to as T21. So this bill, as well as a federal law, came down. Now minors considered under the age of 21. So that makes a big difference. One thing we've seen and heard about youth with tobacco, especially when they're on school property, is an 18-year-old is very, close in that cohort to a 16, 17-year-old versus a 21-year-old. So that big change was definitely supported statewide for the T21 just because of that break in age. But it also, that bill did a shift away from punishing people that, especially our youth, that are carrying the product to more to the retailers. What we've learned is punishing youth typically, as Kelsey will get into, it's usually people of color or more underserved communities. We're just stacking up another issue, and it's not really solving the problem, but more going after the retailers that would be selling to minors. So that was a big shift. And then local control of possession ordinance language remains. So within your statute, Title 30, the Board of County Commissioners still have the authority to have local control possession. Next slide. So really there's a couple big impacts of the minor in possession law. It intended to discourage underage youth from possessing, using, and purchasing tobacco products. Where we believe it's working. We've got some data that's showing, at least on our Healthy Kids in a survey, less youth are reporting vaping or any other nicotine products within the last 30 days. So we've seen that provide a significant drop in youth. And again, we think it's that gap from an 18-year-old to a 21-year-old. And penalties for violating possession laws often include fines. We know that community service or attending mandatory cessation or education programs, but and they can suspend a driver's license as well, or a permit. So that's part of that impacts on that MIP law. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kelsey.
So in looking at public health studies around minors in possession laws, our institutes have found that they're not really quite effective in reducing youth smoking. In 2015, the Institute of Medicine did a huge report on youth tobacco use, and the report actually shows that it entices youth to use tobacco products because it frames it as an adult product. And then again, as Tom mentioned, these laws have been found to disproportionately impact African American and Latinx students nationally. Additionally, research has shown that penalizing youth could deter them from seeking cessation services. So having a penalty will prevent them from asking for help when they need it. And as a public health perspective, we're really wanting to promote interventions that provide cessation resources for our youth who are wanting to quit. We do promote 1-800-QUIT now, as well as the health district has local quit resources for free for residents who live within the health district boundaries.
With regards to the next slide, I'll grab this one.
Okay, no worries.
With regards to the next slide, maybe I won't. The issue that we see, the need for the ordinance, when the state removed the minor in possession of tobacco products from their statute, there's not a law that where it's illegal for them to possess anymore. Now it's illegal for a retailer to sell it, but if you're SRO or somebody in a school district, or if you come across minors with tobacco, it's not illegal for them to have it because we've removed that from our statute, unless a city ordinance or something else has been put in place. So the problem is it eliminates a legal ability for them to just confiscate the item. Whether you cite them a ticket or not is a separate issue, but remove it entirely makes it so it's no longer an illegal product. By retaining the possession as illegal, it does allow law enforcement to confiscate, and it wouldn't be a violation of it, like a taking or of some kind of constitutional issue by the government in that case. The penalty ranges for minor in possession of tobacco products for the counties they changed it to a civil infraction. It used to be a petty offense, misdemeanors, and they changed it to a civil infraction, and specifically specified that the penalties can be up to $1,000 fine. In our case, our previous ordinance had it up to a $100 fine. So when we looked to change the ordinance originally, we were just updating and getting rid of our old language to make it fit with the new statute, being that it's a civil infraction. One of the issues around that is when they renamed it as a civil infraction and pointed us in the direction of the penalties, is they said you can do this fine according to this provision. I don't necessarily see another way to have some kind of a punitive sanction outside of that fine. Many statutes allow courts to suspend fines, or as a condition of probation, have them do something else, like the education programs. Ours doesn't specify that. In fact, they also rewrote the minor in possession of alcohol, minor in possession of marijuana, and minor in possession of paraphernalia. And in those, they specify that there's multiple different penalty avenues a judge can take. On the first offense, they can take up to a $100 fine or an education class. On a second fine, they can do both, or they can actually order the individual to do a substance abuse evaluation and follow through with recommended treatment, which is very similar to someone who was caught with drugs or maybe driving under the influence of alcohol. That is a normal, everyday sentence that occurs in our courthouses where they're ordering somebody to do that evaluation, follow through with recommended treatment, because usually it's somebody who has an issue with drugs or alcohol. So they specifically enumerated that you can do those things, and they also enumerated you can give 24 hours of community service, and on a third offense, I believe they bumped that up to 35 hours. But they didn't do that for our civil infractions, so we're left with a structure which basically gives us the ability to fine them.
All right, we were going to take a pause here and see if you had any questions before we jumped into discussions of a local ordinance.
Commissioner Stevens, do you have a question?
Yeah. I'm trying to follow. So we have, right now we have we have it in place that it's a civil infraction that it would get a person would get a fine for if they.
Well, that's what we were changing it to, and we came to you a few months ago.
Okay, and so.
To the civil infraction, it's a $100 fine or less. Just renaming it as a civil infraction, so that it's not a criminal offense.
But we could do away with it altogether.
We could.
Okay.
But if we did that, then the ability to confiscate, would law enforcement have that ability?
The problem is law enforcement could take it, but potentially they could say you took it unlawfully because it's no longer contraband.
So it seems like we'd want to retain the ability to confiscate the tobacco products, which I presume includes vaping as well.
It has been, they redefined the tobacco products to be more inclusive and wider when they did change them. And that was one of the changes that we put into our ordinance change as well, was to update the definitions to follow.
I mean, but we already saw that it really doesn't work, right? I mean, does it, you know, Kelsey, you were saying that it's not, there's data showing that it doesn't work as a deterrent. So I don't see a reason to have it on the books if it doesn't work. And, yeah. So I would be in favor of not having it. It doesn't work even if they're, even if they're allowed to take it, I mean, they can get another one, right? I mean, some of those those jewels or whatever the vaping product is, they're not, I mean, they're specifically not expensive to buy, so people will get addicted to them. So, I don't think taking it away from somebody is going to inhibit their ability to get it again really quickly. I mean, do we know if most people are actually, are there any studies about young people, whether they're actually able to purchase them and people are breaking the rules by selling to these folks, or are they getting it from like a family member or a sibling or something like that? Do we know anything about that?
I don't know off the top of my head about the national data. I know anecdotally we're hearing a lot of people getting it from their older siblings. We do have some data later on about local tobacco retail ordinances that, because the state does do kind of secret shoppers twice a year, and locally in all of Larimer County, not just unincorporated, but in Fort Collins. In the last year, there's been 37 citations of sales to minors by the state sending out their secret shoppers. So there is some sales happening underage, but then there's also friends and family.
Yeah, I guess I don't believe in the minor in possession ordinance. If it's not working and it's penalizing, unfairly penalizing people of color, I think those are two good reasons to not have it. And in a low-income family, $100 fine can be really, I mean, that can be your groceries for the week. SNAP thinks it's your groceries for even longer than that. So I would like to get rid of it.
Thank you for your questions, Commissioner Stevens. Commissioner Kafalis, do you have questions?
Thank you. Yes, a couple of follow-ups to continue the discussion we're having. One goes back to the outreach that Kelsey referenced. There's the quit line, and I know the health district, when they put out their little newspaper, often talks about cessation services. My question related to that is, how targeted, do we target that kind of outreach to high schoolers and youth, or is it more generic? That is my question, one question.
Thank you, sir.
I believe both at the national level with Quit Now, they do target specifically to youth, as well as we have run quite a few campaigns locally specifically targeting youth. Targeting is the wrong word. Promoting these resources to youth. We've run ads at the movie theaters because that's where youth tend to go in their free time, as well as we've utilized social media, as well as our youth engagement specialists who really provide us direction on where to promote these resources to
And-
reach
and
high
if-
school students.
If I may follow up,
Yes, thank you, sir.
and is there any evidence, anecdotally or otherwise, that shows these practices are effective, making a difference?
So again, I don't know the specific numbers off the top of my head, but in the last 6 years, we've seen the perception of risk of vaping going up. So more youth are understanding that it's an unhealthy practice. Through our Healthy Kids Colorado survey, we've also seen youth smoking rates going down, or tobacco use rates, both e-products and cigars going down as well.
What may I do?
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, just one more for now. I thought at the beginning of the presentation, our public health director suggested that you have a recommendation regarding best practices, and I don't believe you've offered that recommendation, have you?
So I think from a public health well, I don't know if we have a recommendation per se, but we wanted to provide the public health expertise as well as the legal implications for you all to discuss.
Thank you. I have a couple questions, if I might. So I know this happened over the last few days out at our parks and reservoirs where youth were caught with products and stuff. And so they were, I don't know whether it was a state or what they were doing, but they got some confiscated. And I think, to me, I like the idea, at least getting them offering sensation classes, or, being able to take it and then offer them like penalty or this. We don't want to penalize kids, but at least having that incentive, like, well, you could do this, or here's a sensation class, go take it, right? Or just offering them those resources if we don't at least interact with them at that point of them in possession, trying to help them, encourage them to take that. I'm wondering how else we reach some of those youth. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
If the concern is the fine, you can reduce it as far down as you want under the ordinance. I mean, it's just a maximum set for use by the county, and so you can set it as a minimum as well. It can be $10, and you potentially do a $0. The statute for civil infractions is perplexing to me because it basically stated the process for going to court, if you gave them a summons, is that the DA can get involved in plea negotiations, but it can't do the trial itself. So it's more like if you got a ticket, a traffic ticket, and you showed up to fight that ticket, the officer would appear in front of the court to present the evidence against you. So it'd be more like akin to that, and you don't have that typical authority figure like the DA or a county attorney to be enforcing its own ordinance in this case. The way to potentially do it is, if the county attorney was involved, have a procedure wherein they request the person to go do a class. There's MIP classes for alcohols, for classes for speeding, classes for all kinds of things that you can have juveniles do, and then offer as a plea negotiation tool to dismiss the case. But we're kind of limited to the DA's office doing that, if that was something that was going to be a recommendation within the ordinance and something they would have to be willing to take on, which normally they don't really get involved in those cases. So
Yeah.
there's this unfortunate gap created in the statute that doesn't allow some direct
Intervention.
negotiation
Okay.
at that level. And of course, if they had put it into the statute that you specifically could offer those things in lieu of, it would be easy to put it in the statute, and you wouldn't have to use a plea negotiation, plea bargaining type tool to, hey, I'll dismiss this if you go do a class.
And then, I don't want to, I know of some youth that in the years past have, this has gone on their record or something that they had a minor in possession. We don't want to penalize these kids. We want to get them intervention or, confiscate and to me, if you take it away, maybe that makes it harder. So if there was a minor in possession, it's just a civil, does that go on a record or does it, how does it, I don't want the youth having something haunting them for years, with college applications and stuff. We're trying to help, not make
Yeah.
things, harder.
It's no longer considered a criminal offense, so it doesn't go on a criminal record. Then that was, when this came about where they shifted the petty offenses to civil infractions, it was the effect of an entire overhaul of the system. So the legislature began with different felonies, changing the classifications, and sometimes from, like, for example, for drugs, they went from a low-level felony to what they called a drug misdemeanor 1. And then the following years, they dealt with lower-level offenses, changing some of the misdemeanors to petty offenses and a lot of the petty offenses to civil infractions for the sole reason they didn't want it to be going on people's records as such.
Okay. And then, I'm glad to hear the numbers are showing this is decreasing because I remember when my kids were in high school, it was like beginning of the semester, they just confiscated 1 or 2 jewels, and all of a sudden by the end of the semester there was 2 or 3 shoe boxes full of them, and I'm glad to hear that's kind of reversing. Do you think even intervening with youth at that point when they were caught with being under a minor possession, that having that class or really encouraging them to take that class, even if it's under forcing them to do it, would have a help with maybe getting them to have some sensation of those habits?
I appreciate the question, Commissioner. What we have learned is with knowledge, there's typically what we call it the behavioral health model. If somebody understands the risks and understands that nicotine on a developing brain is very concerning, and it does have long-term effects that we know through studies, as well as vaping. Lots of unknown with the vape and how that impacts your lungs and the heavy metals. And they're learning more and more, and it's appearing to not be good. So I think the more education that we provide the youth, we see better decisions and better outcomes. And I know, having 2 in high school now, they have their classes and they come home and, Dad, did you know it does this? Yes. And so I think that's important that we continue that education. I agree, a penalty, it doesn't prove to work, but definitely confiscating it and having, gosh, I wish there was an online or something that was accessible to everyone, that then you would learn more about the effects of nicotine, especially on a developing brain.
So if we didn't have any kind of ordinance on the books, we wouldn't be able to confiscate at all? Or would the state statute allow for that?
Legally, it's no longer illegal to possess it, so you'd have to find some other way to legally be able to
Okay.
take that item.
Well, if it's a civil infraction, is that the same as saying that it's no longer, that it's legal for a minor to possess? The law says you can't have cigarettes if you're under 21.
Well, the law says you can't, it prohibits the sale of cigarettes, right? And so if you find a juvenile at the school and you say, where did you get the cigarette? Well, I got it for Tommy, who's not a sale. Potentially you're involved in a taking of something that person can legally possess. While it's unlawful to sell it, the fact that the juvenile has it, it's not unlawful for him to possess, if that makes sense. But that's the technical difficulty of this issue, is that, can you take it? Yes. If they complain about it, is it lawful? Not necessarily. So it'd be a lot easier if it's just, hey, it's illegal for you to possess this. I'm going to take it from you, regardless of what the penalty is. Because they can, like this weekend, I don't know if they cited anybody,
I don't know.
but obviously, oftentimes officers will be involved in, say, a party at a college where a lot of people are drinking alcohol. They may not give everybody a citation, but they might take the alcohol from the people and dump it out or something of that nature. And therefore, that's kind of what you're looking for, is at least, hey, if I'm not going to give you a ticket, you can't have this.
In regarding alcohol, the laws are such that law enforcement can legally confiscate product that is being consumed by underage folks.
Yes, it's still illegal on the state books, and as I mentioned, they have both fine, education, and community service. And if you hit a second offense or conviction for it, even forcing them to undergo an evaluation and follow through with recommended treatment. So that's a lot stiffer when it comes to alcohol, marijuana, and paraphernalia possession, and of course if you have other drugs as well, but not tobacco.
Commissioner Stevens.
So what happens if I'm caught with that and I don't pay the fine? Does the fine go up? Do I lose my license? Do I?
It's just a civil judgment against you, so we'd have to find a way to collect it if we so wanted to.
So there would be like a collections agent? I mean, I guess I'm just, I just worry about the ways that these things escalate. So, in trying to keep kids out of juvenile justice kind of situations, and knowing that the financial burden on families that get caught up in these situations and can be overwhelming. The fine for me is not something, I actually think we should just get rid of it, but I definitely don't want a fine.
Yeah,
I
usually.
mean, I don't care how little it is. It's hard to, I got to get a stamp. I got to figure out who to send it to. it didn't get lost in the mail. Then it escalates. Collection agency picks it up. I don't know if they do, but then all of a sudden it's $35. And then it's, and then it's somebody harassing my family on this, I mean, I guess it's just there again. And if they are used against people of color more, to me, there's just no reason. We have a lot of programs that we can get to youth, getting the education, and I'm satisfied with those systems. But I guess I just don't think this is the way to go about trying to solve this public health situation.
And usually those fines that are put into place by the court are eventually turned over to some kind of collection agency. I don't know with these low-level fines whether they actually try to enforce those.
They used to at the library. And that's why the library got rid of a fining system, honestly, because it was like, hey, do we want people to read more books, or do we want to penalize them, And so, I mean, I think the thinking is changing in these kind of situations of, how do we actually get people to change behavior? And I don't necessarily think it's penalizing them. And if confiscating is what you're so worried about, I mean, like, if this person got it once, they can get it again. So confiscating it is not like you're going to take their whole stash. They got another jewel or whatever the thing is at home. They got a brother who will buy it for them, or an older friend. I don't know. I mean, I'm just saying that I don't think confiscation is like, ooh, we confiscated it, so it's not going to happen again. I mean, it would be nice if that was the case, but I just don't believe that's true. And knowing nicotine is so addictive, honestly, like, you will do anything to get that next cigarette if you're addicted to nicotine, and so you will find a way to get that. I don't know. I'd just like to get rid of it.
May I offer?
Yes, Commissioner
Well,
Fallis.
Yeah, I mean, my perspective on this issue, and I guess now realizing that it is a bit complicated. One is I think I agree with Commissioner Stevens. I'd rather not see, if there was I think it's appropriate to have some kind of a consequence or something that would, like community service. I wouldn't support the idea of if there's a civil infraction, law enforcement takes away the product. I don't think the intent is to get that's the last time they're ever going to have cigarettes. We know that they're going to go out and get cigarettes, but at least it's some measure of response, in my view, some measure of response or consequence. So I do not support having any kind of a fine, whether it's $5, $10, or $100. I would be more supportive, if it can be done, that there the ability to confiscate and some type of community service. Perhaps somebody could do 10 hours in an intensive care unit where somebody is suffering from lung cancer. I don't know. Those are my thoughts. If we don't do anything, what happens there? if we currently have an ordinance on the books, right? And that has to be updated, or we could just be left alone?
It does need to be updated or removed entirely, because right
removed
now it's referring
Okay,
to
and that's
these-
what Commissioner Stevens perhaps is advocating, Chris.
Correct, because right now it's listing as a petty offense, which is no longer the lawful terminology.
You could just change that to civil infraction.
And we also went in and updated the definitions of tobacco products,
Yeah.
cigarettes as well, to follow the state changes in the statute. But yeah, it does need some sort of update or an elimination entirely.
Understood. And could it be, could the consequence be just community service or some?
Well, that's the problem. It doesn't list that for a civil infraction, that we have the ability to give just community service, at least not if it goes to the court. Through the plea bargain, like when I was with the district attorney's office, you could have somebody, let's say they're a college student that gets a marijuana offense, which at the time was something that would go on the record and potentially affect government loans. So it wasn't unusual to have somebody go out and do a class or do community service, reset their case, have them come back in, prove that to you, and just dismiss it, so that it never goes on a record at all. So there are ways to get to what you want. The problem being, like, as I said, this statute specifically says the district attorney's office can be involved in plea bargaining. So you'd have to get the district attorney's office involved in doing these ordinances, which is much more difficult than just having the county attorney do it, and we know what the policy is under our ordinance.
So the way to simplify this, perhaps, to me, if a young person is caught with a pack of cigarettes, law enforcement takes it away, it's a civil infraction, it's suggested that they do community service, you're saying it's got to go to the district attorneys and there's got to be a whole plea bargain thing?
That's the only way to get them to get
That-
community service or an education program, because the statute doesn't allow it as a penalty from the judge.
I see. Well, that seems rather a lot of
Right.
effort for a pack of cigarettes, so that moves me in the direction of just being done with it and I'm curious what, like, the youth action for health group, what do they recommend, or what are best practices in other parts of the country, other parts of the state? I'd rather target that. I certainly don't want to be dealing with plea bargains over a pack of cigarettes, and I certainly don't want something to go on a person's record.
Yep.
And get into this whole morass of the legal system.
So I agree. I don't, the whole, why do we have these things? We're trying to get youth from not having these affect their young brains and be, trying to help them not develop these long-term addictions. But I also think that since, we know these don't work and, the research has shown, and it is disproportionately impacting, youth of color, that's just not, that's not okay with me. And I know even just a small fine, even maybe having $10 and having escalate is not, when I say about a fine, I'm not looking for really the monetary, it's just the ability to confiscate and then get them into a cessation program. That might be like, but there was something online where they, you have to log in and you have to sit there for that length of time, right? And I don't know what that looks like, but it sounds like it would make it really cumbersome if we have to involve the DA's office to do something like that. Sounds like the statute is written that it makes that really a cumbersome process. Am I correct? Is that how my understanding is?
Well, it's not cumbersome when you're in the system itself. Like I said, as a DA, it was something that was normal, and it was something done daily. I mean, every day of the week they had people coming in on first appearances, and you would meet with them and make offers depending on what you're looking at. And sometimes they were things where you would divert it for plea bargaining reasons, right? That would be a simple method of diverting it, and it would be easy, as I said, if the county attorney was able to be involved in taking care of their own cases. But they didn't write the statute that way.
So Annie, can I ask a question?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Just practically speaking, if confiscation is not allowed and an underage person is at school and has tobacco paraphernalia, can the school confiscate the stuff, or can no one, is it their property and no one can take it?
It would depend on whether the school has specific rules with regards to it, just like having, like there are schools that you can't have your phone
Sure.
in class and things of that reason, level. But with regards to just law enforcement contact,
Got it,
would,
okay.
I mean, yeah, they could take it. Would it be lawful? Potentially not, and you could
Right.
subject yourself to an idiotic lawsuit. Nobody's going to do that,
Right.
is my presumption, but the potential is there. But that's the whole point of
So you
having
could,
it on the books.
you could remove it, you could leave it on the books with no fine and just allow confiscation. You can't require the class because that's a really in-depth process and the DA's already got cases stacked up, so that's probably not reasonable. So it sounds like no fine is the consensus. Do you all want to continue to leave it an offense at all where it can be confiscated, or you want to just withdraw this section? I think that's the direction you all are looking for, is that right?
So if there is no fine and they just confiscate the product, does that go on their record, or do they have to do something after that? Or is it just that we take it and they move on?
The only way it would go on the record is if they actually went to court and someone prosecuted it. The other option is that police officers have the discretion not to charge people with offenses. For example, you get pulled over for a speeding ticket and they give you a warning, right? And it's the same thing with these types of things where an officer could tell them, hey, you're not allowed to have this, take it, throw it away, and never give anybody a summons for it at all.
And maybe hand them a slip of paper, here's a class on sensation, I don't know.
Correct. You could do something different, but it does allow them to take the substances illegal at the time.
Commissioner Stevens?
Yeah, I mean, I agree they have that discretion, but I mean, and I think most police officers would probably use that discretion carefully, but I don't know that all would. And I mean, there again, that comes into the bias situation, right? I mean, I'm not comfortable with that.
Yeah, go, let's go ahead and move on. Maybe we can come back and, I need to think about this for a second. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Excellent conversation. Thank you for your time. Now we'll talk about something that does work and has proven to work and prevents youth under 21 even getting their hands on this stuff, and that is tobacco retailer licenses and enforcement. Right now, with the new law, the Department of Revenue handles retail license enforcement at the state level with underage operatives. So you'll see on there that we were pleasantly surprised to see that they are working hard, DOR, to check every retailer at least twice per year. That is very successful that they're doing that. We thought it was complaint-based at first, and that there were 32 violations in the past 12 months in Larimer County. That included the unincorporated area as well. So there are citing 32 is too many. I'd like to see that 0, definitely, because this is how we are getting it into our youth, and we definitely need to stop that. So we are excited, encouraged to hear this new program with Department of Revenue and how successful they are doing to get in there and make checks to make sure it's not being sold to our minors. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about a local ordinance that, if you did a local tobacco retail license, or TRL, we have 231 retailers in all of the county, but only 27 of those are in the unincorporated area. So if we did a county ordinance, you're talking to 27. Unless you were able to get MOUs or some agreements with our municipalities, then you could increase that number. Does allow for more local control, and you can do more strict control if you would want to do that. And then enforcement policies and procedures, all roles and responsibilities would all be established at the local level. So this would be on top of the state's program already with the Department of Revenue. You would need to set a fee structure. There would have to be some type of enforcement strategy that would be put together. They can be complicated. Again, it would be basically for the 27 Licensed in the unincorporated, and they are now licensed at the state level, and they are being inspected. So this would just somewhat duplicate what the state's doing. And you're next, right? Or are we done? Okay.
When you say fees, would the fees be paid upfront to cover an enforcement program, or would it be a fine type fee?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It would be a license fee, so it'd be upfront, which they do pay Department of Revenue as well for their license fee.
And is this new state program, how long has it been? A year? It's under 2 years, am I correct?
I believe so. Yeah.
So it's already been fairly successful. 32 in a year that's a lot.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised when Kelsey went and found the numbers. So yeah, we were excited to hear that they are getting into our establishments.
Commissioner Stevens.
So what happens if they get, so 32 folks get caught? Do they lose their license? Do they, if another violation, they lose their license? Is it kind of like a liquor kind of situation where they can lose their license to sell?
I will admit I didn't dig out into the nitty gritty, but it is similar to a liquor license protocol. So I believe all of the 32 were just a citation. There might be a fine associated with it, and then similar to liquor licenses. I don't know what the threshold is, but they could lose their license.
Sure. Do we know of other counties that have instituted it?
There are a few different counties that have instituted a local license system, as well as Loveland has a local tobacco retail license system as well. Like Tom spoke to, it really is a way to have some local control, to create stricter protocols for tobacco sales if that's a goal in the future. So really from our state level experts, it's really step one is create a local tobacco retail license program. And then from that, it allows a little bit more local control to say we're going to, put these extra measures in place as well. But again, the enforcement pieces are a little bit complicated. A lot of times it's a partnership between public health and law enforcement. There's a bunch of different ways that enforcement takes place, but there's not really a cookie cutter way to do that.
For me, I think that I'll just say it, and then I can be done speaking for today. But I just, since there is a state program, I don't know of the necessity for it. But I might want more information around how it's worked in other communities and stuff like that. And I feel like that if we're going to go down that path, I'd probably want to do like a public kind of outreach, or at least some outreach to see if this is something that the community would like to see. But I don't know that how much of an impact it would have on just 27 retailers. So, it's not like it's going to curb it for the whole county. So without a partnership with some of the municipalities, I don't know how effective it would be. So I guess I'm in the maybe more information, but as of right now, I'm not saying we should necessarily go down that path.
Thank you, Commissioner Stevens. Commissioner Kofalis.
Yes, regarding this, there are two items for where you would like direction. And on this one, it's more clear to me. And given that the Department of Revenue program is successful, is proving to be successful, I don't think we need a local enforcement, especially if it requires more resources. If we see that the state program is at some point we don't get the results, then maybe that's something to revisit. But it is my opinion that for this, we don't need a local enforcement policies, because the state is providing adequate oversight over the retail, the retail establishments, the 27 in unincorporated that are, that sell tobacco products. So I'm pretty clear on this one.
So I'm of the mind that I think that if they're already being that successful, and I just want to clarify, the 32 violations were the 27, or overall the 213?
Overall, out of the
Okay.
whole county, yes.
It would be interesting to track the data for the 27 in the unincorporated to see how many were there, and maybe keep an eye on that. And then if we find that they're continuing to have violations, maybe we need to do something, another layer, or just maybe, I guess I'm a wait and see kind of person and find out what the process is, and then maybe, I don't know if we can track that data, that if the ones in the unincorporated areas are really becoming problematic, then maybe we do need to revisit that as another layer of enforcement. And what is that process, and when do they lose their license, and those kinds of things. I'm a little aware of what Loveland has going on, and that was kind of when they were trying to, stop the sale of flavored tobacco, I don't know whether that path or not, right? So but I think it sounds like it would be a little bit of time and resources to set something like this up. And we're looking at not increasing drains on resources for right now. So I feel, I don't want to say no. I feel like I'd like to wait and see how this is going. Hopefully we still see success, and maybe have that number go down. But it'd be great. It'd be very interesting to me to track which of the 27, that we do have. So how is that happening? I don't know if you have those numbers now of the 20, if those 32 fractions were mostly in the city or unincorporated. That would also help maybe inform decisions on that. So I guess I'm not against looking at this maybe in the future if this isn't going well, but I think I feel like if it's just started and it's gaining some traction, maybe that's a good thing to let it support it, I guess, and get going. So. But it's great to know that there's an opportunity for us to have I agree, sometimes local control have an extra layer would be a good thing. So that's where I'm at.
Well, I appreciate that, Commissioner. We're definitely tracking the data is something we will continue to do, and be able to even dive a little bit deeper and see if there's any trends in specific parts of our county. That's a big key we want to know. And we are going to have our population epidemiologists look at this, because typically in those areas where we have people of color or underserved, you'll see a lot more advertisement for this product versus in other areas. And that is a huge inequity issue that we're trying to combat through their education team. So that could help us with a lot of now that we have this regulatory framework, because before we never did.
Yeah.
So that is exciting. We want to see what it'll be like year 2, 3, track the data and see what trends we can establish from that, as well do more education in those areas.
No, I think that would be great, because I think incentivizing and trying to educate is a proactive approach, and I'd love to just wait and see. I don't want to say no, don't do this. I'd like to just maybe get more information and wait and see and go forward. And then back to, I know where my colleagues want to go back to, but I think back to the minor possession. I guess I don't want to penalize kids. That's my big thing, especially when this isn't working and it's impacting disproportionately populations that we should not be disproportionately impacting. But I wish there was a simpler way for us to allow law enforcement, when they catch kids with this, to take it. And it doesn't sound like that's a clear way to do it. And so I'm thinking this is maybe a lot more complicated, and it's a simpler path just to, for me, it was not wanting to penalize kids and have them in the system or having to have a fine, but it's more for just being able to take the product away and be able to, hand them a card saying, here's some resources. So, and I'm not sure, it sounds like that's more complicated to do than not. So am I kind of summarizing that, Andy, well enough? Or
I think your summary would be that we'd rather not have the ordinance at all.
yeah, I think so. I mean, for me, it's helping youth not be targeted and helping youth not have develop this habit, and this may not be the tool to do it. So I guess that to me makes it sound pretty straightforward. So, Commissioner Kafalis.
Yes, thank you. But we do need to update. I mean, we eliminated the ordinance, or do we update it to align with state statute, the language in state statute? Do we need to do at least that?
Yes, and so my proposal is potentially we bring it to do either one and then allow you to put it to a vote at public hearing.
And updating the ordinance to align with state statute, the language, would that allow for some interaction between SROs or law enforcement and young people? In other words, I mean, we have done this in the past where rather than a ticket or a citation and all of that, we actually provide them information about where to access the quit line or cessation resources. Isn't that something that could be done? And maybe it's already being done.
I mean, you'd basically be creating an ordinance that would be telling the sheriff's department deputies what they should do with a contact of somebody who has something that isn't illegal or is illegal, but we want you to do this step instead of giving them a ticket. And you can do that. That's your prerogative. You could write that into the ordinance if you wished. But you'd
Couldn't
still
one
have-
write it in the ordinance as a may rather than a shall?
You can.
So that would leave it up to the law enforcement folks to have discretion, based on the circumstances and based on prioritization and all of that.
In fact, I had asked if there was a way that they could see into their system whether there had been prior contacts for this type of ticket, because it's not unusual for them to have something like this. But anecdotally, the deputies were telling me we wouldn't even put it in the system or even search the system for this kind of thing, because there's not going to be, so you're not going to see a prior history. You could clearly indicate that, yeah, the tobacco shall be, taken from the minor, and the officer may, in their discretion, issue
Provide.
a summons. But again, you're creating
No,
something that is still illegal, which that's the question for you.
So did you say you would come back to us with two options? Is that
Right
correct?
now, the options I'm hearing is to get rid of it entirely, or to update it as still remaining illegal and keeping our ordinance to follow the state statute as it was changed. And then there's this third option that you're thinking through, and I don't know what that would necessarily be.
But eliminating it entirely, just not have a local ordinance regarding minor in possession, and that would work with the state statute. We can do that.
Yes.
Well, that's certainly, based on the discussion, that seems like what folks want. I just wish there was a way that we could be providing information to young people, taking a restorative justice approach, something that, there is a bit of a consequence, but also moving them in the direction of incentivizing healthy behavior. But yeah.
So it sounds like we're just, direction today is you're going to bring this forward and giving us the two options and go through that process, because there's a process if we're going to eliminate ordinance too, I guess. So we have to publicly, it's not just, we can't do that till we have to vote on it. So, and then if we don't, the other item, if we don't want to pursue that, then we don't have to bring that forward at all. It would just be the one item that would come back to us.
Correct.
Okay. So, colleagues, I just want to see if we're agreement with that. Did I clearly state that? Is that where we're at? And Lorenda, did you have something you want to add?
My question is, do you want to see both ordinances, or have you given direction today to just see it withdrawn? Because I'm not sure. It feels like you've said withdraw it today.
I'm saying withdraw it, but I don't know what my colleagues are saying.
At this point, the path of least resistance, withdraw.
I earlier when the commissioners Caval said, I wish there was a way we could just take it and have some kind of help, we could offer some help, but if that just, the state statute's still there and it would just be elimination of our local, then I guess, I guess that would be just fine, just to kind of.
And the impact would be that our local law enforcement, sheriff deputies could not confiscate the products that they find. Is that correct?
Yeah, the state had actually removed the
Right.
possession of a minor of tobacco from the state statute as well, so there wouldn't be any illegal method for them basically confiscated under the
Right.
normal ways in which they would take property
So
from
if this
someone.
becomes problematic for the sheriff's office, let's say that they see an upsurge in this kind of thing, they could come back and ask that you put something in place sometime in the future as well. So it's not a now or never kind of situation, right?
True. I mean, you could always revisit the issue if you felt the need. I mean, again, in contact with the sheriff's department rarely ever actually cites someone for this. And I don't know if that's just an indication they're not coming across it very often, or if they deal with it informally. I don't know. But yes, if it became a major issue, you could always come back and revisit the issue at a later date, even if you remove the statute or the ordinance.
Okay. Well, it sounds like we're in alignment then. So, okay. Thank you all for your work in the conversation. It sounds like a very complex issue, but I think we're all on the same page of just trying to help youth not have these in their possession in the future. So let us know how we can help support the education pieces, and sure be very curious to track that data that you talked about. And I forgot about the advertising in those areas. That would be fascinating to see what kind of data pops up with that. So, all right. Well, with that, at 2:26, we have no other further business with the work session. We are adjourned. Thank you.